In our last video, we met the leadership of the Bonesplitterz, right? The leadership in air quotes, because these are all babbling maniacs. But those units were more in tune with the power of the Wall, able to direct the Horde. And so in today's video, we're going to explore that vast green tide of orcs that make up this army. Now, one thing you'll notice quickly is that it's just a lot of orcs, right? No big monsters or war machines, just hordes upon hordes of bodies. This is first and foremost an infantry-based faction, and every one of those soldiers, for lack of a better term, is a raving lunatic. And all of these units, realistically, come from two kits, that is, the Savage Orc kit and the Boar kit. And Games Workshop did some internal kit bashing here to maximize war scrolls for their contents. So for example, from the Savage Orc kit, you make Savage Orcs, you make Savage Orc Moor Boys, Big Stabbas, and Arrow Boys. But in a certain way, right, in a certain sense, this actually kind of plays out to the army's favor in the lore. If you were to look at an assault from a Bonesplitterz army from the sky, they would function a lot like an ant colony going to war. And if you've never seen that, it's just a swarm of endless bodies that clamor all over whatever they're fighting, crawling up their backs, biting, scratching, kicking, stabbing. It would appear as if a green wave thundered against their target, just crashed into them like the ocean hitting a rock. At first it appears very disorganized, but remember, they are a part of this great beast directed by the will of the Wargog Prophet. So with all of that out of the way, let's dive in. We'll start today talking about the Savage Orc. I always try to start with the most basic unit to get you an idea of, like, if you understand the basic guy, then everything is just kind of building off of that. And this is no different. Savage Orcs are the basic troop of the faction, and by far the most numerous. You can of course have your war clan be designed to include more of something else, but on the whole, lore-wise, no matter how much of your specialty things you have a ton of Savage Orcs. Because these are the endless hordes of boys that make up the Gobruks, the two biggest parts of any army. And we mentioned their origins briefly at the top of the week. It's an orc that's chosen by Gorkamorka, gripped by the fever of the Wah, and is led to a Wargog Prophet where he joins the Bonesplitterz. Along the way, he drops all weapons and armor, fashioning his own instruments from his kills, coloring his body with tattoos either of conquests to come or past victories. Now, one of these orcs can be a lot to handle. Again, they're super crazy, just screaming and rushing headlong, stabbing you with all kinds of bones and bits and bobs. But in battle, when the numbers are in the hundreds, and hundreds of hundreds, they become a force of nature. Green, glowing eyes, bulging muscle, the tattoos on their body come to life and move around on them. Madness itself descends on the battlefield, as they are instinctively split into their Gobruks and become the jaws of the great beast of the realms. So really, they're terrifying. They're a terrifying idea. And the next unit kind of follows in that same wake, and that is the Savage Orc Moor Boys. And they're sort of an elite version of the Savage Orcs, right? Air quotes around elites. There's going to be a lot of air quotes this episode for sure. And while Bonesplitterz are all mad by orc standards, these are mad and looning crazy by Bonesplitterz standards. No one quite knows why a Savage Orc becomes a Moor Boy. Some war docs say that when an orc eats the flesh and bone of a particularly powerful beast, that beast will then inhabit the orc's body and kind of just become uncontrollable, super wild, that has the spirit of their prey trapped within. They're thrashing and frothing and screaming, always ready for a fight. The blazing energy of the Wall running in their minds constantly. And when I mentioned the ant colony going to war earlier, this is actually the unit that I had in mind. They develop this madness not to let anything get between them and their target, right? The beast that they're hunting, crawling up walls en masse and just scurrying like monsters, like madmen. They give up their shield, they wield something sharp in both hands and use the weapons as climbing tools, right? Instead of having knives in your hand like normal, they flip them to where the blades are down and use them to climb up walls and stuff. When they find their prey, they do the same thing, and it's called the Death Ride. It's super cool. Basically, if they find a huge great beast, the Death Ride is when one of them tries to crawl up the back of it and stab it up close, right? Get right up in its face and try stabbing it. See if you can poke its eyes out or, hit its throat, something like that. Now, oftentimes they are bucked off, chewed up, or just thrown about, and they just die instantly, but sometimes they land that killing blow, and when they do, the entire horde below is cheering, whooping, and hollering. They are utterly mad. The Death Ride is one of the coolest things ever. Their defining feature is that they're so crazy, they just kind of gave up on defense altogether, right? Even a basic savage orc will use a crude shield made of bones, but these Morboys see nothing but the prey, right? I need that hand free of a shield so I can use a climbing tool to get to my enemy. And these make up the core unit of the Cop Ruck. And they're there so that the War Dogs can keep an eye on them and kind of direct their madness. Remember, the Cop Ruck is sort of our elite infantry arm that it's really in tune with the Waaagh energy. That's why the War Dogs are there. It's why the Morboys are there. It's the crazy heart of the storm where the Prophet kind of directs the beast. Next up are the Arrow Boys, and the idea here is pretty simple. It's just a savage orc with a bow and an arrow. It's not scary until you consider the incredible strength that an orc has. And it can turn this small wooden arrow shaft into a piercing missile in the air. And one thing to note here is that these are not like your typical ranged unit, right? While other ranged units want to remain back and shoot unharassed to kind of act as a support thing, like a scalpel for getting rid of stuff for your melee troops, Arrow Boys will start the fight firing arrows, but then they'll start to see their friends running forward and having fun punching the beasts or enemies in melee, and then they'll want to join in. They'll just drop everything and rush forward. In a sense, they're kind of like a mobile shooting unit in that the idea is they're just shooting whilst they're running into combat, right? They view the shooting as something fun they do while running at the real fun, which is killing something up close. So they wield these big, thick bows and use them as clubs, killing in melee as well as ranged combat. And they form the basis, really the key unit of the Cunnin' Ruck. And they complement the army well, just like we talked about in the other video where, the Cunnin' Ruck is one of the jaws that offers range support, while the Brutal Ruck goes in there and crushes things. They're important to the overall army and fit in quite well. It's the Mork side of the army. Now, in previous orc traditions, additions, that kind of stuff, using ranged attacks was kind of seen as foolish or weak. Not so here. It's just another manifestation of Gorka Morka as the Great Hunter. No one looks down on Arrow Boys. It's just a different way to express that worship. Now, the next unit here, and the last to be able to be built from the Savage Orc box, are the Big Stabbas. These incredible foot troops make up the teeth of the Great Beast, and are also the only unit available in the Tooth Ruck. Put simply, this is when two Savage Orcs are tasked with carrying a giant spear. But this spear is not just a big weapon, it's a holy artifact, as if it was the very spirit or teeth of Gork itself. Through a sea of green zealots, the Big Stabba team runs headlong towards the enemy, driving that great spear into the squishy bits of their prey. These are the premier monster killers, That long shaft of the giant arrow spear thing, able to burrow deep into the guts of the enemy. The more creatures the spear kills, the more significant it becomes, Bonesplitterz see every kill as feeding the spirit of Gorka Morka, as if they were actually his teeth chomping up the prey. Some have been in war clans for centuries and earned nicknames like Big Pokey or Death Stabba. And there's all kinds of myths surrounding these artifacts. For example, there's one called the Skykilla Tooth, which basically a pair of orcs would huck this thing in the air, and every time it went into the sky, it would bring down a huge bird of prey. The Weird Tooth, when it got near a realm gate, would almost act like a compass and point them directly towards the nearest big beast. Now, what's important is they can be made of any material. Like we said with the leaders yesterday, these have religious significance and magical properties to the Bonesplitterz. To anyone else, it's just a big stick with something sharp on the end. Now, next up are the Savage Boar Boys, and this is the basic cavalry of the faction. You'll find these in the Brutal Ruck. These are just orc boys who just really want to get into combat as fast as possible, and their speed and aggression make them prime for that up-close combat. The boars are small enough that the Bonesplitterz don't see them as prey, but complementary predators. Boars can sniff out some great quarry, They just point them towards things to hunt. And feeding the boars different kind of beast remains can change them as well. And there's this huge debate amongst Bonesplitterz about, which parts of the animal make a more aggressive boar, right? If I feed the animal's brains, does it gain the memories and can lead us toward other stuff? If I feed it its feet, will it get faster? That kind of thing. And in combat, they act as the first wave of the brutal ruck, as I said before, slamming hard into the enemy lines. But here's the key, they don't get stuck in. They focus on hit and run tactics, never letting themselves get bogged down, because the idea is they want to be smashing the enemy before their enemy has a chance to respond. And so, rules-wise, this turns into you can retreat and charge in the same turn. But the idea is they're a fast, light cavalry that's meant to just kind of harass the enemy, while the rest of the Gobruck closes in for the kill and blow. And the last unit here is the Savage Orc Maniacs. These are the elite cavalry variant, and this is the primary unit of the Snagoruk. These are the horns of the beast. They act very independently as a flanking force, something like that. And they're often led by Maniac Weird Knobs. Now, if you haven't seen my video yesterday about the Weird Knob, you should really go check it out because he has a trapped spirit of a killer beast inside of his staff, and when he unleashes that, this is the unit that usually gets unleashed upon. It turns each boar rider into a ballistic missile. They scorn the other boar boys for using shields, right? Daring to sully themselves with a shield when having dual weapons lets you deal so much more damage. The enraged animal spirit trapped within that staff permeates the boar just as much as it does the Auric. So even their rides, right, the beasts themselves that they ride in battle are driven to new levels of anger and rage. And here's the thing, for both rider and beast, right, the boar itself, being repeatedly possessed by a raging bestial spirit leaves them a little bit unhinged. So they'll dive into combat, but you don't see them doing the hit and run tactics of their, quote unquote, lesser brethren. They get into combat and they want to stay there. They want to thrash, cut, kill, and laugh until the battle is over. When they start taking damage, they redouble their efforts, and that's literally how they do it rules-wise too. So here's the question I always ask in these videos, what makes this so cool? Well, let's get this out of the way. There's not a ton of diversity here in terms of the model range. The entire army is spawned, like I said, from 2 kits. But the variety they've created in the lore and the war scrolls is fantastic. The difference between the basic troops, right, orcs and boar boys, to their elite counterparts, meaning more boys and maniac boar boys, is that the elites have dropped their shields and utterly devoted themselves to getting more in touch with the Wa and Gorka Morka and lose their thoughts of survival carrying 2 weapons. On a practical level, it's a way to distinguish units based on what they carry, but that translates so well from the lore, this gradual degradation of the orc mind, as the power and will of a god seep in. Over time, they will lose themselves and become these crackling green batteries of Wa energy and might and rage. And in a way, the way it's almost referred to, almost like the reforging process for Stormcast Eternals. Every time they're reforged, they lose part of themselves, lose memories, they lose functionality of compassion, stuff like that. As the power of a god, Sigmar, is more and more infused with them to the point where, for example, Gardas, who's a prominent Stormcast character, has little spots of lightning arcing off them sometimes. It's just what happens as the power of a god dwells in their mortal followers. In this case, an escalation of madness and battle fever. And I also like the kind of duality we have with the units here that we discussed, right? Because putting this week all together, and I hope I haven't downplayed how crazy these guys are, right? I've talked about the nitty-gritty details of how they organize and that kind of stuff. But here's the thing, from one perspective, they seem fairly organized, right? Every unit goes somewhere, they're organized into rucks, except the boys, who can be in both the Brutal and Cunning ruck, but those are both infantry-based things, so that makes perfect sense, and it's all very nice and neat. But on the battlefield, it doesn't look that way, right? If you're the enemy having this army come at you, it is looking at a tidal wave of flesh, the manic force of nature that cannot be understood, reasoned with, or stopped. There's nothing nice and neat about them. And I love that it's both. It is totally both simultaneously. It is organized once the Urgok Prophet assumes control of that giant beast spirit. They fall into their rucks and attack almost like a single organism, while at the same time, each orc is individually mad as a hatter, right? Thrashing, fighting, and rushing towards the enemy. screaming all the way and getting each other pumped for battle. And throughout all of it, on every level, it encompasses all aspects of Gorka Morka, right? The Grots used to be the cunning ones and the Orcs were just the brutal, but now they've incorporated a way of like, no. A single war clan will embody both aspects of their god. There is the brutal ruck, there is the cunning ruck, but they come together to act as a singular organism and defeat their enemy. And for all those reasons, I love the Bonesplitterz. It's a fantastic army. This is actually going to be the last of the lore videos because there's not a lot of units here. I did a pretty good deep dive, I think, on the earlier stuff. But I have really enjoyed these videos this week. If you are available tomorrow, I'm going to be doing a quick live stream about just some ways to build the army and kind of dive in there as a new player. But it is a ton of fun, and I hope you'll join me. And I hope that you enjoyed this week. And I want to ask you what your favorite Bonesplitter unit is. For me personally, it's the Moor Boys. I love the death ride when they climb up a monster and just try to like basically ride it like a bucking bull and just kind of like just ride along with it. Try to kill it, but maybe not. Probably die in the process. Either way, have a blast. And it just makes me chuckle thinking about it, especially when I think about playing against friends who have stuff like Keeper of Secrets, just them trying to claw up the back of a Keeper of Secrets or ride it. So, I don't know, I thought it was hilarious. You go ahead and let me know your favorite in the comments below, and I'll catch you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you for watching, and happy wargaming.